Welcome. Today we are talking about core concepts of quality and safety, and this is part 2. And I'm joined by Lyle Saar. Lyle, can you introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yes, I am a fourth-year medical student at University of Massachusetts. I have a really strong interest in quality improvement, and I'm really excited to be working with Dr. Kadam on this podcast.
Thank you so much. So we talked in the first part a little bit about quality in general and what are some of these important concepts that play into it. And I want to talk a little bit more about quality as a discipline. There are these terms being thrown around that people often get mixed up, like quality control, quality assurance, and quality improvement, QC, QA, QI. I think it's good to have a really solid understanding how these three concepts are different, and maybe we can think of some explanations and examples. So what do you understand quality control to be?
Quality control, I think, is what we initially think of when we say, let's measure something, let's see if this is performing up to standards, and whatever standards that may be, if we're meeting it and if we're meeting it in the correct way. And being able to identify poor performance, poor quality, I think that's where the control aspect comes in.
Okay. So the example I have here from the ABR non-interpretive skills syllabus is when a radiologist reviews and corrects errors in a radiology report before finalizing the report. That makes sense. So there's a product, which is the radiology report, and just before we sign it, we make sure everything is correct. There are no spelling errors, no errors of omission or commission, or things like that, and then we sign it. So that's quality control. It's one report that's being checked before it's released. Let's see if we can translate this into other areas. So if you go to a restaurant, what would be an example of quality control?
Seeing if there are pests in the kitchen, but maybe if we expect a dish, we want to see if it has all the components or has the actual plating.
Okay, let's go with that last one. So you have an individual plate that comes out of the kitchen, and in a good restaurant, somebody should check that plate before it goes out to the guests. So it has to have all the components that are promised on the menu, have to be on the dish. You want to make sure that they're all cooked properly. Then you want to also make sure that the plate looks clean. And so sometimes you see them wipe off a little drop of
Yeah.
sauce somewhere just to make it look clean. And then you bring it to the table. So that's quality control. So you don't have any intervention at the time it's cooked. Just before you give it to the customer, you do a last check and then decide if it's good enough to go out or not. So that's the quality control. So to me, that's pretty inefficient. It's just every time you have something you hand over, you do a check, and it would be more effective to do something more systematic that assures that you put the right thing out. So that takes us actually to quality assurance. We talked last time about consistency. You help people to put out a product or a service consistently at a certain level of quality. The example we have here in the syllabus is when you use a standardized report, like a template, to minimize errors in the report. So that makes sense, right? So now you're not dictating a lot into the report, which could have errors in it. You have a pre-populated text that's error-free. And if you don't have to change the text very much, you have a higher quality report. So let's go back to the restaurant. So now the quality assurance, what would be the equivalent in the restaurant?
Because it's more system driven and process driven, if the restaurant has a conveyor belt system, like each area is responsible for each component, and before moving it on to the next component, if each person has their own standards and checks and balances in place, it's a more system-based approach. So having a framework like that in place, that framework itself, I think, is the QA, like quality assurance component of making a dish.
That's one way of doing it. So some larger restaurants actually do that, where they have chefs in the kitchen that only do one specific component of a dish, or they only focus on one dish, and they are the expert in getting that right every time. So that is a measure of quality assurance. Yes. Or in fast food restaurants, they have little visual plugs on the wall telling the worker how to assemble the chicken sandwich, right? What goes
Yes.
first, the salad, then the tomato, and then the chicken, and then the dressing, and then the bread, so that they all have a guide on doing that consistently. All of these are measures of quality assurance. Okay, perfect. So that is easier. That seems to have broader impact than just quality control. So this affects more items and is a more systemic kind of intervention. And then so quality improvement, how would you define that?
That kind of brings everything that we talked about into a bigger scale and framework. These are activities that are specifically designed to improve the performance quality in an organization. And the key word here is in a systematic way that's also sustainable. So we know there's something wrong, or if we know there's an error, we have a framework, but now we want to improve it, not just sustain, not just maintain quality. We want to improve.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So quality improvement to me is the fun part. That's what I like to do. Everything else is more technical, but in quality improvement, you actually look at a problem and you solve problems. For example, in the MRI area, if you have metallic foreign bodies getting past the screening and entering the MRI area, it can harm patients substantially. Patients have died from that. There's oxygen tanks that have come through the door and flew in the scanner and killed patients. So it can be very dramatic. But so quality improvement would look at that problem and try to solve it. And there is a very defined process for quality improvement that we have adopted from industry. Can you name an industry that we've adopted quality improvement from?
Broadly speaking, maybe the production, because manufacturers
Production, yes,
and factories,
yes,
they
yes.
have a huge model in terms of quality improvement to ensure safety of their workers.
Good. There is one company in Japan that produces something that has had great influence on this quality improvement project. Do you know which one?
Toyota.
Yes, yes.
Cars.
Toyota, that's right. There's a book, The Toyota Way. It's really interesting about their quality improvement. There was an American who helped them develop this, and it was great, great outcomes.
Yeah.
The Toyota production system. We've adapted that from industry. This method has been tried and proven for a long time. At my institution, we use this tool from Toyota that's called the A3 tool, because the piece of paper that they used for this in the beginning was the A3 letter size.
Yes.
So it stuck on the name, the A3 tool, but it basically lines out 9 steps in a quality improvement project. And at the core of it is a plan, do, study, act cycle, which we're going to talk about later. Good. So quality improvement is more active, it's more fun, more rewarding. It's a team approach. It is a scientific approach. It's a method that you can use. And I can tell you, if you select your projects carefully and you follow those steps, you can solve any problem. The issues I see where people fail is that they choose to solve something that's unsolvable, or they fail to implement it properly at the end. So when you find the solutions and you can't implement the solutions properly or sustain them, that's where projects fail. Can you think of something, a feature in a project in healthcare that might indicate that it's more likely to fail? What kind of quality improvement project do you think is impossible to do? What makes it difficult to do?
Something that strives for big increments of change at a time, things that are drastic in their change, or things that don't have enough support from all the stakeholders. If the frontline workers, as we describe it, are not capable, if it's above or out of their reach or out of their capabilities, I think that's a very strong indicator of it not being implementable or sustainable.
Yeah, those are good examples. So those are good examples. You have to have support, especially when you want to buy something. So often we have a problem and we know when we buy this software application or that tool, it solves the problem right away, but we don't have the money to buy it. So that's often a problem. We find it difficult as an academic institution to implement projects that require IT participation, because our IT teams are thinly stretched, that it's hard to get their time on projects like this. And then sometimes it can be difficult to do projects where multiple medical specialties have to collaborate because it's so hard to get everybody together at the same time. So you have to have the expectation that this could take a long time. It's still doable, but those are definitely more difficult, those kinds of things. Okay, great. Yeah, I think that covers it. There's actually a framework of thinking of safety culture as it moves through different stages of maturity. And typically it starts off, the very primitive way is not a safe way at all, is where you cover up mistakes and you don't disclose any errors to patients and hide them from public view. That's absolutely unacceptable. It's not healthy. It's not good. You can't learn from errors, and you owe it to patients to disclose any errors and work with them through the process. The next step is that organization move towards checking the boxes. So they do meet the requirements when the Joint Commission comes around, or the CMS requirements, but they don't really mean it, but at least on paper, they fulfill the requirements and they have some infrastructure. Yes. And then you move into systems that have more infrastructure. They realize that this is really important, that we need to learn from errors. So now you have reporting systems for errors. You have people managing sentinel events with root cause analysis. You have quality improvement experts that can manage quality improvement projects. You have system engineers that can prove processes to make them safe from human intervention, essentially, because humans are error prone. Yeah, exactly. So you need something to prevent the errors. That's a higher level of maturity. And then the last level of maturity is where you proactively try to identify areas where errors could occur, and you start error proofing before any harm has ever come to a patient. Another important principle in quality improvement that we already mentioned before is to include the frontline staff. So when you're working on a process, you really want the frontline staff involved, because they are the ones who really have the expert knowledge on the process, and you need their input. Anything else you can think of on that topic?
I think we covered it broadly. A really big keyword that I've noticed as someone who's also learning this is the just culture.
That's a cool topic. That's actually very dear to my heart, but it does exceed our time for today. So we'll call it quits here for part 2, and then we'll continue our conversation in part 3. Thank you so much, Lyle.
Thank you.